I would say we start. Great to have you here. It's morning in Berlin. We also have participants from all over the world, so I hope you have a good day. A very warm welcome to all of you to this virtual English launch of the report Water in a Heated World that was authored and published by the German Advisory Council on Global Change. I spare you with the long German translation, but the acronym, maybe as you already know, is WBGU. My name is Maike Voss. My background is in political science and public health, and I'm a co-director of Neues, Handeln, which is a policy consultancy and communication agency in Berlin, in Germany. And as you maybe also know, the WBGU is one, if not the most influential academic councils in Germany, advising the German government, especially on environmental topics and international policy and governance. Each year, the council published a report on selected topics. You find all of them on their website. Today, we learn more about their latest report on water in a heated world, presented later by one of the co-authors. And we will discuss this report, but also water sector, water governance in general, with a very competent set of speakers in the panel discussions. After they have answered some questions that I raised, you also have the opportunity to raise questions using the chat function. And you can also use emojis as you see in Zoom. So please use all the functions that you see here in Zoom. Maybe a little bit more on housekeeping. This meeting will be recorded. So you find a video after the event on the WBGU website. And of course, please help us spread the word if you would like to share it then. As I said, you can use the chat. That would be lovely all throughout the event. Maybe you also have some questions later after presenting the report. We have now a little bit more than 120 people joining us, counting. So please use that chat. You can also use the chat to say hi or to state where you are from. You can also use it if you think there is something, a project you might be involved in and you want to share some knowledge and links. So that would be great if you can use that too. To start and to get to know you better, we would like to have like a little exercise, a little survey that should pop up quite soon. Because we want to know where do you see, in which community do you belong? So I can see it now, so maybe you can do that. That would be great. And then when everyone has done that, we will see the results coming up. I'll give it another second. Now we see the results. We have 36% of you are in science academia. That's interesting. Education, politics, and government, followed by NGOs, businesses, and no one from media, which is, I think, okay, but science is the majority. Thank you so much. This was just to get like a feeling of who is in the room, who are we talking with. Thank you so much, but please feel free to use the chat for any further information you would like to provide. I would like now to start with the presentation of what we are actually talking about, the report on water in a heated world. It will be presented by Professor Dr. Jörg, who is one of the co-authors and co-chair of the WBGU. He's an environmental engineer and leads the Research Center for Urban Water Management at the Technical University in Munich here in Germany since 2013. Sorry. Previously, he was a professor of environmental engineering at the Colorado School of Mines in the USA and research director at the NSF Engineering Research Center on reinventing the nation water infrastructure. If you have any questions for Jörg, please feel free to raise them in the chat. I have many, always, but of course, I prioritize yours. Jörg, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Maike. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the entire Advisory Council to this virtual launch of our most recent flagship report entitled Water in a Heated World. If you don't know the German Advisory Council on Global Change, it was established in 1992 as an independent scientific advisory body to the German government, and its tasks are to analyze global environmental and development challenges on the basis of scientific evidence, evaluate global sustainability policy, and give recommendations to action and research. And in that role, we function as an early warning system. The Advisory Council is composed of 9 experts with different areas of expertise and is supported by an office with full-time scientists and staff members. Water is powerful, yet fragile, an object of conflict and at the same time a unifying medium. But we observe accelerated changes in the global water cycle. Regional water emergencies are increasing with respect to frequency, magnitude, and duration of extreme events. We see increasing number of floods and droughts. We see glacier retreat and loss of permafrost soils, water shortage in cities, increasing water pollution and depletion of water resources, sea level rise in coastal regions, and shift of precipitation patterns towards arid regions. We can conclude that the natural water cycle actually has been substantially altered by anthropogenic activities. We have long relied on empirical observations of known precipitation pattern, stream discharges, and groundwater recharge rates as a basis and foundation of design and operation of water infrastructure. However, this is increasingly getting out of hand and more uncertain. These threats are by no means limited to certain water-stressed regions, but we can observe more widely representing a pattern of planetary dimension. In our report, we have analyzed 5 regional water emergencies, including droughts in the MENA region, severe groundwater depletion due to excessive use, water pollution to organic contaminants in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as water scarcity in cities with the example of Sao Paulo and Chennai, and glacier retreats. All of them are resulting in increased loss of life and limb, long-term adverse effects on human health, affecting large-scale ecosystems and their biodiversity, and resulting in major economic losses. Here's just one example illustrating the magnitude of change, the impact of glacial losses in the Hindu Kush and Malayan mountain range. Although the data are quite uncertain how these losses will play out, data differ between 20 and 65%. What is certain is that more than 2 billion people already are getting water from these river basins, and 200 million of them already suffering from increased water stress. And this is going to increase rapidly due to the impacts of agriculture, food production, industrial wealth, as well as drinking water supply. The Advisory Council speaks of these challenges and changes as threatening situations where the limits of controllability are exceeded. Social structures and ecosystems are substantially destabilized, and the scope of action no longer exists. 2 very recent examples are still on our minds. The devastating flooding events in Valencia, Spain, is an example of too much water, and the extended droughts in Southern California, where the available water for firefighting was not designed to fight monster fires as we now experience in Los Angeles. Extreme events such as prolonged droughts, large-scale flooding, or extreme flash floods can neither be avoided nor completely controlled. But in order to avoid large-scale and disruptive changes in water availability, we recommend to maintain proper distance to these limits of controllability. Traditional mitigation strategies and methods alone are insufficient to cope with these challenges. Non-stationary is a new normal, which requires revised strategies in water management and constant recalibration of their local adaptability. You see here that we have increasing or declining trends. We might even experience step changes when you think of a semi-arid region that now becomes arid, where no agriculture is possible, even economic losses, and people have to move out, or simply the higher variance, the higher variability we see in some of these events. And these changes are going to continue. We need to really engage in negotiations with everyone involved on different scales on the risk we are willing to tolerate and how far adaptation can go or even is affordable. And where this is not possible, we need to be prepared for a plan B to have an orderly retreat from these regions. These are similar experiences across different regions and countries. We need to maintain a safe distance. I think that's very clear from these limits of controllability. And we believe there are 4 ways to accomplish that. First, we need to limit drivers. There's no alternative to limiting global warming and even reversing it in the long term. Second, we need to increase adaptability by a climate resilient, socially balanced water management. Third, we need to manage and maintain water quality. And fourth, we need adjustments to the international water governance. Given these transboundary challenges, all countries need to step up to these challenges, and these efforts need to be leveraged by regional and international cooperation. There's actually also quite positive development for these changes that are needed. When you think of the establishment of the UN Secretary General Special Envoy on Water, or the fact that the water agenda is now firmly embedded in the UN climate change conferences. 57 countries signed at the most recent COP29 in Baku the Declaration on Water for Climate Action with 3 key elements. First, promote water dialogues and partnerships, strengthen the generation of scientific evidence for the impact of change on water, and to enhance water-related climate policy action. However, questions remain how these requirements can be met and translated into specific action. This is where our flagship report offers answers. Considering the new quality of risk and growing uncertainty regarding the availability of water, as well as the large number of sectors affected, water must be treated as a cross-cutting theme. For this, we're proposing 7 guiding principles and actions for a climate resilient and socially balanced water management at the local, regional, and international scale. Ensure water as a common good for people and nature. We need to adopt non-stationary, highly dynamic conditions. I want to give you one example of what this means for my domain. In conventional environmental engineering, we tend to design according to conventional and agreed procedures rooted in single disciplines. But what is needed is to design transdisciplinary. This requires other sequences of design steps. For example, in embedded network sequences adopted from the IT, rather than iterative or sequential. We need other types of organizing and more reflective, regular reflection mode rather than in classical project planning ones. We need different modes of stakeholder engagement, new scientific concepts. We need action research. And also we need to change our language. Probably think of more reasoning from assets and social capital rather than just talking about risks and threats. And of course, we need new types of institutional embedding. What does this mean now for short-term action in this particular space? Well, certainly we need to rapidly adopt our infrastructure planning assumptions. The underlying assumptions don't hold true anymore. When you think of an extreme event that might have occurred in one time in 100 years, which might now occur in a 10-year time frame. We need to diversify our water portfolios, and we need to manage not just water supply, but also water consumption. And of course, we need better data to do this. And in particular, decision makers need to use this data. And this requires use of real-time data. And obviously, we have tremendous opportunities to also using AI to have better forecasting. So to continue with our guiding principles, We need planning that requires comprehensive risk characterization. We need to manage blue and green water. Blue water is surface water, groundwater, lake water, and green water is soil moisture and atmospheric water. And they need to be managed jointly. And we need to enable a science-based discourse. And we also see here a new role for scientists who could assist in continuously assessing adaptation measures, but also inform decision makers in a more direct fashion and a more rapidly fashion. Valuing water and appreciating its value is also important, and this needs to include consideration from risk of damage and loss of value. We call them stranded assets. And finally, we need to speed up and accelerate implementation. We should not rely solely on central and formal government structures, but also see the opportunity to involve informal, decentralized governance structures. The Council has also thought of new approach to water management to acknowledge and, where possible, minimize uncertainties by 4 requirements for the design and management of water resources and infrastructure. We need to assess the efficacy of measures based on today's knowledge, let's say with respect to restoring a climate-resilient landscape, water balance, or water-sensitive cities. But we also need to expand our planning horizon to 2050 and beyond. Even that needs constant reflection. The feasibility of measures should also be assessed by considering the availability of water, technologies, financial resources, institutional capacity, and space requirements, and public acceptance. And we need to put greater emphasis on possible benefits for climate and biodiversity protection, as well as health, social and economic advantages that might outweigh the original intent of a concrete measure. And finally, to avoid any unintended consequences, all impacts of measures should be identified and evaluated using systematic and transdisciplinary approaches. I also want to illustrate this with one brief example here from my home state, Bavaria. And this state also is experiencing water stress in the northern part. And there's a proposal on the table to build a 300-kilometer long pipeline to divert water from Lake Constance, which is in the southwest part, to the very north. This is estimated to take about 25 years for completion and cost more than 4 billion euros. So what do we know about the water availability in 2050? Who would still benefit? What else could be financed with these funds with respect to more decentralized measures in retaining water in the landscape, stormwater harvesting, or water recycling? We might end up with a stranded asset here that is not up to the challenges in 2050. So due to these close interdependency between water quantity and also water quality, it is important for human and ecosystem health. Protection of water quality is of utmost importance. And also here, we see 4 central building blocks. The first is a consistent implementation of the zero emission strategy, as well as including preventive measures. The second, the contemporary test procedures and methods to better understand, in particular, persistent pollutants. Third, to integrate approaches for the recovery of raw materials from wastewater, to see this as a resource. This includes nutrients, biopolymers, inorganic salts, biogas, or heat. And last but not least, more flexible development and expansion of climate-resilient urban water and sanitation infrastructure in middle and low-income countries. The Advisory Council recommends developing an international water strategy as a new incentive to water diplomacy, which can strengthen the international water negotiations and serve as a platform for corresponding scientific cooperation that informs policy making. For instance, governance of blue and green water could include information, consultation, and potentially even approval obligations for projects that have a significant impact on transboundary atmospheric water transport. These efforts need to be mirrored at the national level to define a national framework for transformation. Germany, for instance, has adopted a national water strategy, which evolved from a bottom-up process involving all relevant stakeholders. In addition, new strategies are needed at the local level, including self-organized informal governance, as mentioned earlier, as well as improved disaster relief and crisis management. The Advisory Council advocates the establishment of a water mapping initiative. This initiative could consist of 2 units, a science platform and an expert panel. The science platform should bring together existing scientific knowledge and expertise in order to identify impending regional water emergencies. But we can also learn from each other what has worked and what has not worked to cope with these challenges. The expert panel can then steer this platform and feeds the results of its work into the political processes. An international water strategy would offer the international community the opportunity to move from a rather fragmented water governance to one that is more coherent, at least as coherent as possible. And it would integrate governance for blue and green water. The earlier we take action, the more options exist to establish a proactive, climate-resilient water management. And with that, I'd like to conclude by saying that the extreme events are certainly accelerating worldwide. And with that, we have risks and uncertainties that represent a new quality. Water is not only the messenger delivering the bad news of climate change, but it is also an enabler of climate mitigation. So there are great opportunities. Avoiding water crisis requires a proactive action and transformative policy. And we need to limit changes to the global water balance, and foremost, this relates to climate and ecosystem protection. We need to increase our adaptive capacity, and we made a proposal for climate resilient, socially balanced water management. And of course, we also need to strengthen international water governance. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I hope we have triggered your interest in learning more about this report, and you're welcome to download this report following this QR code. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jörg, for your very fantastic insights into the report. I think we will also find a link later to the report if you don't have time now to use the QR code here. And we also, Jörg, got some questions for you in the chat. I read them out to you. First is, how could the new nature restoration law in the EU, benefit water quality, availability, and management? Can you provide us some ideas here?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we already mentioned that there's a key role to strengthen also the water balance or the landscape water balance, as well as building water resilient cities. So nature has a key role to play, and we obviously very much dependent on the ecosystem services nature is providing. And whatever we can do there will have multiple benefits. I think this is a given. So I think strengthening and valuing these multiple benefits is key to decision making. Rather than thinking in a silo, we need a new resource, we are getting it from somewhere else, right? I illustrated in this little example, building a pipe, shifting water from one place to the other. So we really need to think more holistically and see benefits of these policies.
Thank you so much. 2, 3 questions more, but I think we can also push some of the questions later into the panel discussions, because I know what we will be touching on there. But maybe one more from Gunnar Braun. Have you reviewed the effects on energy too? For example, reduced fertilizers protects water and reduces energy demand, securing local water resources, reducing pumping water, especially linked to your Bavarian example.
Yeah, I did mention the 4 requirements in my talk, which we think are key really to assess measures for adaptation. And the second was talking about multiple benefits and resources, of course. And when we weigh these options by protecting, let's say, a pristine watershed and not polluting it with any contaminants we need to extract with applying a lot of effort and energy, then obviously in the long run, this is a way better effort. So I think balancing these benefits and also taking advantage of nature or ecosystem services, but also acknowledging the limits of ecosystem services, because there's a limit with respect to self-cleanability of the nature. I think this would also maybe point to more long-term solutions. And maybe this is also something where people struggle, because we know you want an immediate response, an immediate solution, but I think valuing these long-term perspective and putting it in perspective how the world might change until 2050 would also end up with different options.
Thanks, Jörg. We are getting a lot more questions in. I would pick one more, because the others we can also discuss later in the panel discussion, especially the question from Barbara, Stefan, or Johannes. But there's one interesting question from Dietmar Schmidt. How far you in getting, how do you get responses from policymakers already on the water report now? Do you get any feedback?
Yeah, it's relatively too early to say. We just released this, the German version, handed over to the federal government in October. And we're now engaging in these discussions on various levels, the national level, the EU level, but also the international level and the UN. And there's, I think, a good opportunity for us to also inform the UN Water Conference series, which will continue in 26. The G7, G20 countries are already gearing up for developing strategies, and we think we could certainly inform this process. So we are optimistic to really engage in more detailed discussions with these various stakeholders.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think this event today shows also the level of engagement and that you are planning. So thank you very much for your presentation and the quick Q&A here. No questions that you raised here from the audience gets lost. We all save them, and I will try to pick on them later when we come to the wider discussion. But now we would like to continue with the panel discussion, and I will introduce the panelists in just a second. But maybe what do we want to discuss here? Because we have lots of knowledge, lots of science from the IPCC, from the water report Jörg just presented. We have political agendas in the Baku Declaration, for example. So the question that we want to raise is, what do we make with it? How do we accelerate and really get into action? So this is the guiding question now for the panel discussions. What do we do with it? And how do we increase action, especially also at the local level? So let me introduce the four panelists to you, and then we dive right in it. Let me start with Professor Dr. Anna-Katharina Hornidge. She's a development and knowledge sociologist. She is also, together with Jörg, a WBGU co-chair and director of the German Institute on Development and Sustainability in Bonn, where she also holds a professorship for global sustainability development. Before that, she also was a professor for social science in the Marine Tropics Institute at the University of Bremen. So she brings global governance and water governance perfectly together. I'm very much looking forward to your input in just a second, Anna-Katharina. We also have Dr. Akica Bahri from Tunisia. She's there, the former Minister of Agriculture, Water Resources and Fishery. She joined the International Water Management Institute prior to her post at the ministry there. She was the director of the IWMI in Africa, where she was based in Ghana, but working there on the whole African continent. She holds a doctor engineer degree from the Institut National Polytechnique de Toulouse in France, and a PhD as well. And she also worked at the African Development Bank, so also has this international focus there, which is amazing for our discussions today. Great to have you, Akica. Let me continue with Professor Martina Angela Caretta, who is an associate professor at Lund University in Sweden. And she's also the coordinating lead author of the 2022 IPCC report, where she led the chapter on water impact, vulnerability, and adaptation. She considers herself, and I love that, a feminist geographer, researching the intersection of human-environment interactions with a focus on climate change adaptation, mitigation, particularly in the context of green transition. Welcome you, Martina, as well. And we have, as the fourth panelist, Professor Kalanithy Vairavamoorthy. He serves as the Executive Director of the International Water Association. Kala is a water resource management expert with long experience in research and also now at international level. His particular expertise is in urban water issues. Kala has a PhD and Master of Science in Environmental Engineering from Imperial College in London. And he's also served as professor at the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras. So you see, we have competence in this area, water governance, water management here on this panel. And I ask all of the panelists to come in with an input of 4 minutes approximately each on where do we currently stand internationally on water governance? What aspect of water governance required international cooperation? Where can't we not act as a nation alone, but where do we need others? And also maybe reflect a little bit on what Jörg just has said and presented on the WBGU report to give us a little bit their perspective on the evidence that we have now in front of us. Anna-Katharina, you are a co-author, so of course I think you are a big fan of the water report, but maybe you can also reflect a little bit of that. But what do you think? Where do we stand internationally right now? Maybe also reflecting a little bit what has happened this week in the US.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being interested in the report and being in the water camp, so to say, and supporting this effort also to contribute to science-based water advice and policy advice in the field of water. Now, where do we stand? I mean, in the background of this report, very much also stood our assessment that regional water emergencies increasingly take place, quantity and quality, in terms of water quantity and in terms of water quality. They take on a planetary dimension. At the same time, we observed over years that water on the international level decreased in terms of the attention that it was receiving. While we then were, of course, very happily observing and trying to contribute to the UN water process. So behind that report also stood the ambition to support scientifically based, support the German government in contributing to that UN water process, while of course being fully aware that the multilateral level is in all fields of policy making, but also especially in the field of water, is not the only level. But it's always about the interplay between local, national, regional, and international levels. Where do we stand now? I think some of the questions also in the chat already pointed to the situation that is rather dire, especially on the geopolitical and multilateral level. Democracies are systematically undermined in many areas. But what does that mean for water governance? For water governance, and this is sort of where we come from, it means that any form of cooperation becomes more and more important, and protecting spaces where international cooperation remains possible is gaining importance. And water has, historically speaking, been a field where cooperation also in very tense situations, also transboundary cooperation in conflictual or geopolitically tense situations, often remains still possible. Of course, we also have negative examples, but it is an area that that has a history of being depoliticized, one could say, because of its technical infrastructural nature, and that yeah, in situations, I'm now thinking, for instance, of situation in Central Asia in the late 1990s. It allows also cooperation when cooperation in other policy areas becomes more difficult, and at the same time, of course, also invites and creates or continues to keep spaces open for subject-oriented cooperation, here then focused on water. And that's the hope that we have, no, to contribute also through this report to discussions between science and policy making that assure that this UN water process can be actually carried forward now. Also by not only drawing on the multilateral UN level, but also by consciously involving plurilateral formats such as the G20, or also minilateral formats such as the G7.
Thank you so much, Anna-Katharina, for your first insights. We will hear more from you a little bit later, but I would like to invite Akica to come in with her first initial statement or ideas. Where do we stand internationally? Where is action especially needed, and collaboration? And maybe also some words on the water report, if you like.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maike, and thank you for inviting me to take part to this meeting and discussion around the report. I think it is really a timely discussion because of, as it was mentioned before, about the sense of emergency and urgency about problems related to water scarcity, I mean, the problems are really increasing, and we think that we know some of the solutions, but they are not really implemented, and there are also other problems that are preventing us, because I mean, we don't look at it in a more comprehensive way. And so from the problem of water governance, I think we are really at a critical juncture internationally. I think there is something that for me, I have been saying it several times at different occasions, that there is the need to recognize the water matters for our economy. We don't understand how much water, I mean, people don't understand how much water is important for our economy, how much it is impacting our food system, industry, the energy production, hygiene, and even now all the data centers, we know how much the water is needed and energy to run them. So, I mean, the centrality of water is still not well perceived and well understood. And I think this is also something important that we have to stress. There is also the problem of the fragmentation of the water sector, and we really need to break down the silos and provide channels for connecting and attracting a wide range of players from outside of the water sector, including the finance, the regulation, policy, decision-making. And really, we have to make, as it has been done for the climate, water everybody's business. And this is still not the case. I think that it is something that we have to work on in order to, and I mean, the report, I think, is going in this direction, and the UN water agenda and so on. But I mean, I think that we need to put much more effort on this. And we need also to overcome the political, social, and cultural obstacles. So this is also very, very important aspect that I think that we have to focus on. So I think that what the report is proposing from an international water strategy, I think it's very much, I mean, as I said, timely and important. And we really have to work on this, and also how this will translate at the national and local levels, because I mean, and the link between these different scales. So this is, I would say, I would focus not only on the green and blue water, but also on the gray water. I think it's also important from the point of view of governance. So this is to answer your first question. The other, there was a question related to while we require, this international collaboration. I think that when you think about the transboundary water management, the water security and conflict prevention, the Pacific Institute was mentioning that in 2000, there were about 20 water-related conflicts. Last year, there were about 350 water-related conflicts. So you see how much, natural resources and water are at the center. And this is where we need also water diplomacy and work at an international level in order to reduce these conflicts. Climate, of course, but also, last year there was this incredible, we have the biodiversity, the desertification, and the climate at the same time with the COPs. And, we really have to have, and water was there, but we need to have much more, the water featured much more, much more in all these different conventions and also in their implementation and in the emergency response and disaster management. From the point of view of the report, there were things that I would have liked to see mentioned maybe a little bit more. I have been with all what we are going through actually internationally. I see how much we have a value crisis, and so the questions of equity and social justice, how much they need to be put at the center. Questions of values, of long-term sustainability, about the community engagement, I think is there, but and also, of course, I think the policy coherence. Very often we see, for example, we talk about the water, energy, and food nexus. The difference, the coherence of the policies is very often is missing, and it's another important aspect to stress. But this is what I would like to, my contribution for the time being. Thank you, Maike.
Thank you so much, Akica. I think that's, thank you for the feedback. I think that's something that we can really also discuss even further, which also brings me to Martina, because I think, Martina, this is the value, equity, social justice part is something you are also very interested in. So maybe we can also touch on this. But first, Martina, great to have you. Maybe you can also reflect a little bit, where do we stand internationally on water governance? Where should we look more into, and also maybe some words reflecting on the water report?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Maike, and thank you for having me today. I appreciate the invitation because I start maybe from the last question. I see a lot of parallelism in this report and the report that we produced with the working group too that came out in 2022, and particularly the chapter on water that I read. I think this report also sharply highlights the fact that water is and will be the first manifestation through which the majority of people in the world will experience climate change. And this is something that, connects also to what Akica was saying, that, climate change has become like, a protagonist in a way. We should also make water a protagonist. And I think that this report, as the IPCC report points to that. So the fact that we have to move towards climate resilient water management is crucial to adapt and mitigate current challenges. Is something that we also said in the IPCC report that I see, further demonstrated here in this report. I think that one element that also the reports have in common, but maybe around the language, is that, as Anna-Katharina was saying before, she was talking about water quality and water quantity. Maybe a term that we found that was a bit easier maybe to communicate was like water insecurity, which, in very simple terms means too much water, too little water in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I think we're increasingly seeing that, and it's something that people can relate to. Because, if we think about the current discussions, on one hand, like I see a lot of questions in the chat room there around the politics is going in one direction, the climate is going in another, and they seem to be going like this, right? They're separate routes. But we need to be proactive from the local to the international level in terms of require substantial funding and substantial action to be able to remediate the issues that we are seeing related to climate change induced water insecurity. There are a lot of events that people see in the news and the people can relate it to. I mean, think about the latest LA fires, the Valencia flood, the floods that we've seen in Eastern Europe, just to think about some. These are events that people can clearly connect to, that remember very clearly, that are that have a clear relationship, say, with climate change. But to make it even more real, because the last elections that we've heard about, everyone was saying that it was like a one-issue election, right? It was just about the economics. Like people were worried about inflation, people were worried, you know, about financial things. Well, okay, then if we have to turn it into economics and like talk money, as Akica was saying before, let me turn to the Global Risk Report that was published this week by the World Economic Forum that says that just in 2024, there were more than 320 billion of economic losses due to water disasters, okay? And there were also 20 million people displaced in the last decades because of water disasters, right? So it is, if we have these numbers in our hand, it is also maybe easier to communicate to the general electorate why that water has such a crucial role, but also to communicate more clearly maybe to policymakers these escalating cost of inaction, because this is what is happening. We are like in a situation of stall of inaction. Also, one maybe last thing that I can add is that the cost of inaction obviously is something that we're experiencing today, but that we will be experiencing even more in the future. For instance, the report talks about that we need to move to a situation where we need to avoid maladaptation. And this is something that we published on with some colleagues. They also wrote the IPCC report. We published a paper last year in One Earth where we looked at the effectiveness of water-related adaptation measures and in the future, and showed how they, as basically the more we get closer to 1.5, and we will be surpassing 1.5 and we move to 2 and so on and so forth, the less effective adaptation measures that we take today will actually be in the future, right? And so maybe we think about irrigation as an effective way of dealing with water insecurity today, but maybe in the future, these will actually be a maladaptation measures whereby we move to groundwater depletion, right? So I think that just to round up, I think that it is, situation of cognitive dissonance where we find ourselves, where again, politics going one way, science not being maybe clearly able to communicate with policy as much. I think turning it to the economic aspect and also pointing to, look, if these are the risks and the amount of money we talk about today, think about what we will be in the future. Maybe it is a way for us to get there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Especially interesting what you said, the planning in uncertainty, the measures that we implement today in 20, 30 years are completely the wrong measures, and thinking about that. But at the same time, we can't really plan exactly for what will be happening, but we have an idea looking in the data today. Thank you so much, Martina. Very interesting. Let's continue with Carla and his reflection on where do we stand. Especially interesting, Carla, because you also embody both academia and the international field as most of the panelists. Yeah. Where do we stand right now? And also maybe some reflections on the report.
Sure. No, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's really an honor for me to be here. And I think the report, as has already been said, is very timely, and I think it's a wonderful report. So I just want to congratulate all of those that were involved in the development of the report. I mean, I think one of the challenges we face with respect to governance around water is very much that it's not joined up. You know, we have a lot of institutional fragmentation, but water is really a system of systems. And we need to recognize this, and our governance structures really need to reflect this. If we, for example, take urban water, we tend to have different institutions managing water supply, another managing the wastewater side of the business, another managing stormwater side of the business. And very often these institutions don't talk to each other. But if we are trying to create a response to a warming planet, it has to be based on a much more sort of integrated and circular perspective. So if we have a growing population that needs water, an integrated perspective will shift our focus from looking for new sources far away, but really looking at efficiencies from within the system. So rather than extracting water from afar, we might invest in things like leakage reduction, demand management, the reuse of wastewater, the use of stormwater through rainwater harvesting, for example. And all of these options can only be considered if we have this integrated perspective and the institutions are working together. And all of this requires good governance. If we were to fly at a slightly higher altitude, we start to recognize that the urban water system is sitting within a watershed, and it competes for water with other sectors like agriculture, industry, and of course, we need water for nature. But it can also contribute and complement these sectors. And so again, a systems view helps us to articulate the positive and the negative flows that exist between these sectors and optimize the overall water footprint in a way that benefits all these competing sectors. And, so we do really need to change that perspective and recognize that, one person's waste or return flows become someone else's feedstock or inputs. And the magic can really only happen if everyone is in the room together. I know we have a whole discipline called Integrated Water Resources Management, IWRM, but if we're totally honest with ourselves, we don't have many good examples of how this is working. So we have to ask ourselves, how can we progress this sort of very compelling conceptual idea into practice? It's been very difficult, and I think we do need to be very honest and think about how can we make this type of joined up thinking work. Now, one of the other questions you asked, Maike, was around international collaboration. And I think a lot of people have raised quite some very good points with respect to sort of transboundary water issues, etc. But I was at a meeting just last week at Chatham House, and they were talking about international collaboration around virtual water. And here, we know that high-income economies of the global north are heavily dependent on water use beyond their own borders to produce their food, their clothes, and their goods. And that water use is often sourced from very poor global south countries. And so we need an improved understanding of our water footprints and their implications for global water, climate, and food security. Now, during the Glasgow COP26, there was the Glasgow Declaration for Fair Water Footprints. And this was really trying to provide some global leadership in this respect. And this declaration, it encourages examining the degree to which consumer nations in the global north are dependent on water use in the global south to meet their own needs. And it talks about fairness for these poorer countries in terms of these interventions. Are they, zero pollution? Are the withdrawals of water sustainable? Do they protect the natural environment in these poor countries? And do they still maintain their resiliency to things like droughts and floods? And also, are the workers in these industries being provided with the things that they should be, like universal access to safe water and sanitation? Now, the challenge, of course, with such declarations is how do we operationalize them? And how do we ensure that there's a level playing field so that those who are trying to implement these responsible supply chains are rewarded and not penalized because the cost of production may go up? And so again, a systems view helps us in that respect. The final thing I wanted to talk about is the criteria. There were really some good criteria presented in the report. And I think you have to be commended because those criteria are very important. And there was some discussion just now about unintended consequences. But I wanted to touch upon the last point made by Martina in relation to uncertainty. I mean, we know that there are huge uncertainties associated with climate change. And when we look at the urban scale, for example, we really don't know, how climate change is going to affect rainfall events. And what I mean by that is the intensity, duration, and frequency of these events, which are really important for us to design responses in terms of stormwater management. So the question is, how can we build infrastructure that's flexible to this uncertainty, that can adapt over time, right? So it's not moving along a single trajectory, but it has this adaptive capacity so we can move in two or three different directions as time progresses. And this is where I think, and the report does touch upon this quite well, this is where I see decentralized approaches are going to be key, because they have this sort of modular capacity, this natural sort of adaptive capacity that allows them to be built in stages and allows them to sort of modify their trajectory. And a good example in stormwater is SUDs, Sustainable Urban Drainage Options, where we use sort of green infrastructure or nature-based solutions to respond to rainfall events, but they're modular, and so they can be built in stages. So this thinking about adaptive capacity is really important, and I think we have to encourage this much more. And it does create some challenges, right? Because, you know, when we optimize our investments, we tend to remove unnecessary capacity or redundancy. But now if we're going to respond to climate and the uncertainties associated with it, we might have to artificially, sort of consciously create redundancy in order to provide this adaptive capacity. So adding this flexibility might have greater short-term costs, but at the same time, it might bring long-term benefits. So how do we value flexibility in our analysis? And this question really needs to be addressed when we move forward. So that would be my initial response to the questions, Maike. Back to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you also for reflecting on the criteria. This is especially something the council members are very interested on, like where does our report land, but also what do other experts think of it. So thank you so much for your input. I would now like to direct some individual questions to all of the panelists, also looking a little bit already to the many questions from the chat. Anna-Katharina, I would like to start with you again, and maybe we can reflect a little bit on what you have already touched on, G7, G20, but also the UN water processes, maybe also in the context of the new US administration and what's happening there, or what do we expect will be happening there? We never really know, but maybe you can give us some insights there.
Yeah, thanks, Maike. I mean, one, I think, defining characteristic of the new US administration is that it's not really predictable, but rather disruptive policymaking becomes nearly the norm and becomes also fashion then internationally, because the so-called leader of the free world, or that position, is a trendsetter and has been a trendsetter in the past. And thus, I think for many policy areas, we need to expect, as said, a lot more disruptive policymaking, and that holds also true for the field of water. Now, what does that then mean? And I think there was also one question on the international water strategy that we recommend. We also in the WBGU discuss it along the line of, well, alternative platforms become more important. Alternative platforms for cooperation become more important. Now, that is not supposed to mean that the United Nations as a multilateral platform that all countries are part of, or 193 countries are part of, should be undermined. But we can already observe since a number of years, and that has a lot to do with the increase of social polarization processes that tip into political autocratization in many countries and in high-income countries, just as much as in middle and low-income countries, and interestingly also on all continents. And what it means is that we see that plurilateral forms of cooperation become more important. That's why it's underlined the G20 and the G7, in order to take decisions, but also prepare decisions, and with this increase the likeliness then that they can be taken forward on the multilateral level. But also the cooperation directly with regional powers becomes more relevant. And with regions now in the field of water governance, in regions that are substantially shaped by transboundary water governance, as well as then the reflection on where cooperation is necessary with the probable future poles of this multipolar world that we see emerging. So China, India, Brazil, the US. And now bringing it back onto into the area of water governance, we've seen in the G20 under the Saudi Arabian presidency, we had the beginning of water dialogues taking place, and that has been now taken up by the South African presidency for this year to sort of build on these water dialogues, develop them further. Brazil had also taken it up. Now we have to see how this will develop this year, but we from WBGU side see it as a hook, as a hook to build on and hopefully contribute to build these water dialogues within the G20 context further in order to here ensure that potential decision-making process that can then feed into the UN water process becomes more likely. Similarly, within the G7 under the Italian presidency last year, the so-called Water Coalition was formed. Also, again, a hook in a way to now build further onto in the context of the Canadian presidency. Now, Jörg already mentioned that with Retno Marsudi, the former foreign minister of Indonesia, now as heading the UN water process as special envoy, we see someone who is very well placed. She is someone who has been for a number of years representing a so-called regional power, a regional power that held the G20 presidency just 2 years ago, so before India, about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago now already. So very well placed to also mobilize networks around the globe and in the area of regional powers of countries that very much can also develop sort of pull forces to bring in others, and there we hope that that also Germany, the EU, can contribute in a fruitful manner in this. Now, I don't want to speak for, well, if I still can speak, I would actually like to say something on the topic of self-organized water management, because I think it was addressed in some of the comments as well, and it was a very, for us, also important area actually in writing the report to underline not only the importance of informal, self-organized forms, bottom-up, local level forms of water management, depending on many different terms to describe it, but to underline the importance of a proactive state and self-organization. You need both. You need proactive states who create and nurture and support self-organization. And you need also then the societal and civic engagement to fill that space and to take it forward. And we had seen within the integrated water resources management approach, we had seen that IWRM became sort of, in a way, scaled out in many regions, but was implemented through the states, and was in some regions that caused a situation where water user associations were created top-down without then being filled, or without also integrating actually the existing local forms and traditionally grown forms of water governance. That causes ruptures and problems. And similarly, Akica mentioned policy coherence, very important, but of course also coherence across levels, governance levels is very important. And there we try to bring together examples from across different world regions and across different sort of groups of challenges in the field of water governance in order to understand self-organized water governance and a proactive state. That intricate relationship is important, and it is the role of the state to keep an eye and to foster that intricate relationship.
I understand. This is where the music is to really get into action.
Yes.
Thank you. Akica, I would like to look a little bit with you on the situation and the challenges Tunisia faces right now when it comes to water scarcity, for example. But maybe also we can zoom out a little bit after Tunisia, looking at the African continent in general, and maybe also look a little bit at approaches, for example, like citywide sanitation as one promising approach for some cities, or also addressing informal settlement. Maybe you can give us some insights there.
Yeah, thank you, Maike. First of all, I would like to say that in Tunisia, there was a very strong focus on the water management and especially on water mobilization. So we've done a lot in matter of building dams, big, medium, small dams, in developing the use of the groundwater. I mean, farmers can drill wells up to 50 meters without any authorization. Below, they need authorization. And so it was, I mean, building water treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant, as even connecting our dams in order to be able to transfer water from one place to another. I mean, building desalination plants and so on. So a lot has been done. And it was interesting, state secretary that had been, for 17 years as Secretary of State, was saying, we've done the most easy part. The most difficult one is starting now, and it's about the management. And so it is true that, because, it involves institution, it involves how we are going. We started even pricing, water supplies, pricing, reclaimed water pricing, wastewater and reclaimed water. So everything has been done, put in place. But at the same time now, I was not expecting that I would see that we were reaching a time where we are, as a closed basin, that we have done what has been done and we are short of water. Especially we have had about 7 years of drought, and all the water last year was going for drinking water supply and almost nothing for irrigation. And even for water supply, there were problems and so on. So it is interesting to see how, the country that has investing a lot on water management and water mobilization is facing the issue of, water scarcity and not even being able to provide. We had a water shortage in some places and so on, and we are still, the level of the water in our dams is very low. So it is because, as I said, it's a question about the water. So it is 80%, 75% is going for irrigation, for agriculture. But the question is, what are we supposed to grow? What are we supposed to export? What are we supposed to import? Because it's all water related. And this is a major issue. And I would like to thank Carla for, mentioning this question of virtual water, because it's really at the core of what we need to discuss and what we need to do. Because, in our case, we have favored, the drilling of groundwater up to 50 meters, but now it is overdrafted. All our groundwater, and even the deep and very deep, we are tapping fossil water, is all, we are reaching really, the boundary concern. We have salt intrusion, seawater intrusion, the water table going down. And the problem is also what kind of governance we can put when we are dealing with groundwater. So there is problem, what kind of crop should we grow? And what kind of crop should we export? Because we are exporting our water and our groundwater that is overdrafted. And this is a question of really to look at this interconnectedness of countries. We are more and more, interconnected, and what is happening in one place has an impact in another place. And the water that is being drilled in the southern part of Tunisia, fossil water, is something that is going to have an impact. The dates that we are producing, even though, in the southern part, it's difficult to grow something else. Some vegetables, but it's mostly dates. So what are we going to do? What are the social implications of, because of the water issue? So we have to really understand all our decisions, how they are water related and what it means in on the impact on our water resources. So this is, and as I said, I mean, the groundwater governance is a big issue because we can put in place, I mean, governance for the surface water, but for groundwater is still, we are struggling. We are working on this aspect, but it is still a big problem. So, and it's not only for groundwater, the problem of governance, but for all, as I said, we are moving in this area where it is more, how do we manage the water? And it is the major problem that we are facing now. And it is a question of, we need to change the social contract. We need to have a different, I mean, we have to address, for example, this question of water losses. We are, I mean, losing up to 30% of the water in our network. So how do I, and they are not built, how do we do this? And we know that it is costly to repair, I mean, the water networks. As I said, we are relying, for example, and when there was a problem with the war in Ukraine, I mean, all these imports of wheat, because we are very much depending, we are producing, I mean, durum wheat, but we need to import soft wheat. So this question also was very much, I mean, it is a very important problem. And also this disconnect between bottom-up and top-down approaches. And we still, it's a very much very centralized type of governance. And even though we have some of the institutions that are decentralized, but the decision is still very much centralized. And I think we have to really start thinking of how to give. And this means also to shift from the point of view of to have, I mean, the legitimacy and the trust of the organization that are going to put in place. And it comes back again to values. And this is something also that is still, I mean, a challenge.
Yeah,
and
can I come in, because as a question that also came in the audience and that we discussed earlier is, if we want to decentralize even more, is the citywide sanitation approach then the very promising one? What do you think?
I mean, for sanitation issues, I think it is. I mean, it is the solution for. First of all, when we talk about this, I mean, of citywide sanitation, it's about gain, it's about equity, it's about justice, it was environmental justice and so on. And it is about systems that are going to work more, first of all, incrementally, because I mean, it is because we have in the cities areas that are connected to the sewer networks and areas that are not. And the question is how to have, first of all, that we cannot connect all the different parts of the cities, and there is no reason, because I mean the sewers are the most expensive part of the network. But how we can have, I mean, a decent and a system that is working centralized or decentralized and providing the service that the citizens are looking for. So it is also from the sanitation issue, I mean, another challenge. But I mean, it is the only way that we can go for. And it is not only, I see, for example, in Tunisia, because there are all the peri-urban areas, they need to have a system that works, and it provides a lot of synergies between the centralized and the decentralized systems, because we can think of, I mean, of the wastewater treatment plant that are also working in synergies with the other part of the system. So there are a number of potential and positive things that can come up from this, decentralized system. So for water supply and also for sanitation.
Thank you so much, Akica, for your ideas and reflections. I would like to continue with you, Martina, and I will mix a little bit my questions that I have prepared with the questions also from the audience, because we also got questions on the mapping initiative. Do you think is the water mapping initiative, also using the insights of IPCC and IPBES, a good idea, a good approach to foster international cooperation, and also looking at the data that we have? What are your reflections on this? Maybe you can also look a little bit on the science policy interface how do we use and how can science contribute even more effectively to water governance? And maybe because it came up also in Akica's statement, maybe we can look a little bit more on more inclusive approaches on water governance, looking on gender. We also had a recent question on religious communities, for example. I know it's a lot, but maybe I can help you to guide you through all of these questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Maike, for the questions, and also thank you for the questions that I see keep on coming in the chat. So if we start with the water mapping initiative, as I think several comments have come through in the chat, there seems to be several similar related initiatives, and I think we work and live in this type of science policy water world are aware of that. But it is also true that most of these initiatives are fragmented. Like, for instance, they don't necessarily bring together science and policy in the same way as the water mapping initiative proposes. I think it is a valuable initiative because, well, it starts off from the assessments that we do with the IPCC and the IPBS, and brings together existing scientific expertise with the principle for exchange of information with business, policymakers, and stakeholders. And what I think is a particularly valuable aspect of it is the fact that it focuses on communicating imminent water emergencies, which is something that, I think the wider public and or policymakers only realize once these emergencies have already taken place. So keeping track of that, I think, is a very valuable element. The water mapping initiative has also an inbuilt regional focus, as it relies on existing regional and local data. And you want also regional and local political processes. What needs, however, to be kept in mind is that we don't have the same quality and quantity of climatological and water data for all the regions, right? And with that, I think about, for instance, this is something we faced when we were writing our assessment. We don't have comparable data for many regions of the world, and there are regions of the world, I think of Central America or Central Africa, where we literally are lacking almost like even benchmarks when it comes to some elements, right? So I think this initiative could also be, a propeller in a way to, if it wants to deal with the regional and local, water mapping, it could also then be a propeller to highlight even more clearly and even just, keep on reiterating the message that there are some regions of the world where data is missing. And so with that, maybe I'll move to your second question that is related to how science can contribute. I mean, this is like an obvious answer. Science can contribute with more hard data. The thing is that I go back to what I said before, science can't contribute if we don't have policymakers behind us that realize that the funding needs to go in the direction to be able to develop databases and models, right? And even gather the data, have meteorological stations. I mean, that's one element. But then based on my experience with the IPCC, I can assert, that science can contribute more proficiently, more effectively to informing politics and policy if we are able to combine a hard climatological, meteorological data with the social science field-based data. We found this crucial in our experience. We were a highly interdisciplinary team in the working group too, and by only being able to bring together a hard scientist positivistic approach with a social science lived experience post-structuralist approach, where we're actually able to highlight the complexity and the entanglement between climate and vulnerability and future risks, okay? So interdisciplinarity in that is crucial. On top of that, we also strived in the last IPCC report to bring together, to try to integrate local and indigenous knowledge, which is also a fundamental aspect to be able to put in place successful and supported adaptation strategies, right, where there is like a local buy-in. You know, one also aspect, because yes, there can be a lot of, like, say, we as a scientist can provide the data. Maybe policymakers can go as far as to, you know, agree with us and actually put in place the regulations and, you know, enabling, right, these type of action to happen. But then what we've seen in the history of like development, okay, is that if we have like a top-down approach where decisions are pushed from above, it is not actually a given that they are taken up and or work locally. And what we've seen by doing a systematic review, also as a follow-up of our IPCC work that was published this last year, we saw actually that the majority of adaptation initiatives to water-induced disasters are actually locally led. They are not pushed by a government, they are not pushed by a regional entity. It is people themselves that take the issues onto their hands and move to try to resolve, you know, their everyday challenges that they're faced with. And then moving on to your last question, which was, you know, how do you integrate and like, how do you bring in other voices and issues around equity? What we were also able to see with this systematic review is that those cases where adaptation was more quote unquote successful, quote unquote effective, and I say quote unquote because we always have the future element, you know, there is the uncertainty element, but we also have the element of asking ourselves, for whom is it effective? For whom is it successful, you know, because maybe, yeah, there are different interests, right? But what we saw is that generally those that were more effective and successful were more inclusive. There were more subjectivities, more identities that were part of the planning and decision-making process around those adaptation measures. And I think particularly, you know, we're still at a stage where intersectionality, that is to say gender, class, race, is not something that is widely, say, acclaimed even in the science world. So then a lot of studies focus on like inclusion of women, for instance, right? And so including women and having women like in decision-making spaces is crucial when it comes to water management, because, well, we know that the water management world is still very masculine. I mean, from Europe to the rest of the world, the majority of water engineers are still men. The majority of those decisions are taken from just the angle of one subject. And what does this lead to? It leads to the fact that when decisions around priorities in a situation of water insecurity need to be made, they always tend to focus on the productive aspect of water. That is to say, industries, for example, how do we keep like the economy going? And they don't focus, they don't at least give priority generally to the reproductive, the everyday aspect, the domestic dimension that the water has, and that is actually crucial, because there is always this neoliberal thinking that, well, you know, women will figure it out, you know, they've done like care work since the beginning of times, and they've managed to be resilient in conditions of water insecurity, and so they will continue to do so, right? So I think that just having the right people sitting in the room, and I think this was something also that other people in this panel highlighted before, right, makes a huge difference. And this has to do with diversity, both, you know, if we talk about local initiatives in terms of identities, okay, but also if we talk about scientific initiatives, also in terms of diversity of disciplinary engagement around the issue of water management. And with that, thank you.
Thank you so much, Martina, for your insights. I think you saw a little bit the applause, the clapping hands that you've got. Amazing. Carla, thank you so much for your patience, but of course we also want to hear your thoughts. First of all, I would like to learn more about the organization you lead, the IWA. What is it? Maybe you can explain a little bit more, especially the bottom-up character of your organization. And maybe also you can reflect a little bit what Martina just said. How can the IW address data deficits maybe, and where can you come in integrating local knowledge in your work? Maybe you do this already. Can we tap into that a little bit? And then we come to a second question. Carla, I don't hear you yet.
Sorry, I was on mute. You can hear me now?
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So I was pleased to note, that IWA was mentioned in the report as an exchange platform. And I think that really does talk to the type of organization IWA is. I mean, from its inception, it's really a collaborative platform where scientists, policymakers and practitioners come together, and it's truly international. So we have many disciplines from many geographies. And we're governed by around sort of 75 countries who are our governing members, who are from all the continents around the world. And these are really the national associations from those countries who are the boots on the ground for IWA. So a lot of the knowledge that IWA generates, it gets disseminated through our members on the ground, and the problems that we deal with are very much in response to what our governing members are requesting from us. So we have this sort of very pluralistic governance that ensures that the diverse perspectives really guide our efforts. And it's very much a demand-driven approach because we are a membership association. So our membership is, like I said, around 10,000 people. We have researchers, we have practitioners, we have policymakers, we have governments. And at the heart of IWA is our specialist groups. We have something like 60 specialist groups. And these are really sort of deep dive research engines of the association. And they sort of delve into some of the challenges that the world is facing, and then they try and develop solutions for that. And most of the challenges that these specialist groups respond to are really coming from the practitioners who sit within the specialist group. And so the researchers are responding to the practitioners. And I think one of the key aspects of IWA is our ability to bridge research and practice. So if you think about a specialist group, or you think about our association, on one side, we have really hardcore researchers who you might not want to let out of the laboratory. And on the other side, you have hardcore practitioners who are really interested in pumps and valves. But in the middle, we have a community, the majority of IWA, who are researchers who will have one foot in practice. And you'll have practitioners who will have one foot in research. And so we're able to sort of bridge that chasm between research and practice because we bring them all together, and they have a lot of discussions. And the other important thing about IWA is that we have this continuum, right? So if you take the specialist groups, they dialogue among themselves through our online portal, Connect Plus. They meet very frequently. IWA has a conference every week of the year somewhere in the world. And so the specialist group researchers, practitioners meet to further discuss and develop their ideas. And then they're able to communicate and disseminate their ideas through the publications that IWA produce. I mean, we publish some 16 or 17 journals. We publish a lot of, we have a magazine. We publish a lot of knowledge products. And I think that one of the best parts of IWA is our commitment to open access and digital knowledge sharing. And so we do remove the barriers from people having access to all this information. And we've seen, since we opened up even our journals, we've seen a lot more activity coming from the Global South. And we see it almost like as an empowering part of the process. So we are a bottom-up organization. Everything we deal with is really coming from practitioners who are on the ground, who are facing challenges. They bring those problems to the researchers. The researchers start to try and develop those. And then through this sort of continuous discourse, through our events and through, the various types of community of practice engagement activities that we support, they're able to develop those solutions and take it into practice. So I think that sort of summarizes, Maike, what IWA is about. We do have programs, right? And those programs are cross-cutting. And those programs involve lots of different specialist groups. So we have a program on climate smart utilities, where we bring utilities together, and we have a data portal where the utilities are able to share, some of their experiences with responding to climate, both in terms of mitigation challenges, but also in terms of adaptation. We have a program on digital water, where we look at how digital innovations can act as an enabler to help people to transition to this new normal of managing water, which is much more around circular economy principles. So we do have these programmatic initiatives, and sanitation is one of the biggest initiatives that we have within IWA. The other thing we also do, just to finally conclude on this particular point, because I do want to talk a bit about sanitation, but the final point is really around the fact that we have now established a technology innovating platform where we bring ideas that are almost close to commercialization, and we bring different types of disciplines to the table in a sort of a 4 or 5 day event where the challenge is for them to sort of help us think about how do we commercialize some of this technology. How do we manufacture it? How do we fabricate it? And how do we take it to the market? And so again, this is our commitment of taking research to practice. So we have a methodology, if you like, a template of taking ideas that are sort of TRL 4-5, and then sort of working with different disciplines to try and understand how can we bring the price point of this technology down, and how can we help to commercialize and take it to the market.
Thank you so much. Before we come to sanitation, citywide sanitation, as Akica also talked about, I have a question. The infrastructure of the IWA that you just explained, how can this be used for example, a water mapping initiative? Is that the right place to do that, or what do you need to do that?
No, I think that we would. So we have done certain types of mapping activities with, say, for example, the World Bank, where we're looking at mapping infrastructure around the world, asset infrastructure. And so why people usually come to IWA is because we have this extensive network. Mm-hmm. And so if they want to mine lots and lots of countries for data on certain types of issues, they will utilize the IWA network to sort of try and facilitate that. And IWA can be that bridge between the person who wants that data in a certain way and those boots on the ground that can access that data. So a lot of the benchmarking associated with assets, the IBNet from the World Bank, for example, IWA really tries to support the creation, the generation of that data that's needed in order to map the current state of affairs of infrastructure. We do a lot of that with, say, water loss assessments around the world, looking at best practice in terms of leakage reduction and non-revenue water levels. So we do that quite a bit, and we have mechanisms to reward people, who are exemplars in that field. And so our Climate Smart Utilities program is cataloging and mapping information around what people are doing in response to climate change, but then also recognizing those people that are really leaders in the trailblazers, right? And capturing their stories, their case studies. What we find is that when people present case studies, the light bulbs go off, right? Mm. Because people start to see how they can actually replicate what other people are doing, particularly, within certain contexts. So in East Africa, for example, we might be able to share with countries in East Africa, and then they can all try to sort of, learn from each other. And similarly with West Africa, we're very sort of context sensitive, right? We know that one size does not fit all. And so we have the system within IWA to sort of operate at that sort of sub-regional level. I wouldn't even say regional level.
Thank you so much. And maybe now tapping a little bit more on sanitation, as Akica also talked about. Yeah. What steps are needed to accelerate the implementation of promising approaches such as the citywide approach, particularly when you look at rapidly urbanizing regions in Africa, but also other continents?
Yeah, I think Akica made some really good points, but I think one of the things that we need to do, right, is we need to bring sanitation much higher on the political agenda. And I think climate change is a very good vehicle, right? You know, I think it was Hillary Clinton that said, never waste a good opportunity, right? And climate change is a wonderful opportunity in respect of sanitation, because what it does is it makes sanitation everybody's problem. You see, emerging economies are experiencing large population growth within the urban area, exponential, and their infrastructure hasn't really kept up pace with this growth. And so you have large areas of people living without access to sanitation, and it really poses a risk to the entire population, because, you know, cities become constipated when there's no water, and then as climate change increases flooding, human waste starts to flood into cities. People become to realize that sanitation isn't a problem of the poor, it's not a problem of the disenfranchised, and it's not a problem that the affluent try not to see. It doesn't respect any boundaries, right? And so the question is, how do we prevent this course? How do we change the narrative so that sanitation is not about the other person, but it's about all of us? And for me, you know, we have to start talking about sanitation not as an act of charity or as an act of altruism. It's really an act of self-preservation. And as water professionals, we at IWA are trying to promote sanitation as an act of what we would call enlightened self-interest. You know, philosophy whereby, you know, where one is aware that by serving the interest of others, we are actually serving the interests of ourselves. And this comes really a lot from what happened at COVID, right? During COVID, it didn't make sense to treat one part of the community and not the other. It only worked if everyone got vaccinated, if everyone got access to water, right? And it was all about enlightened self-interest. So the first thing I would say is that our sector needs to start promoting sanitation in this way, and we need to try and sort of politicize it much more. And I know people might not like me saying this, but we almost need to frighten the affluent into doing something, because it's really going to hit them very badly. Now, the other point that I wanted to touch upon, which Akica also touched upon, is about decentralization or distributed systems. And we need to embrace this as a strategic opportunity. And there's some really interesting and imaginative work going into these types of systems. You see, when you're trying to serve the unserved, traditional centralized systems, they're very heavy. They require a lot of effort to get them moving. There's a lot of planning, a lot of land approvals, a lot of money, and a lot of time to implement. And this really leads to very often it leads to long-term procrastination. And you see this in many countries. I travel a lot, and I'll meet someone in a city in India who say, I'm going to build a sewer system in the next couple of years. And you go there 5 years later and they're saying the same thing. You go there 10 years later, they're saying the same thing. They never do it because, you know, it's heavy. Whereas decentralization, it avoids many of these problems. It has this agility, and it can be implemented at stages and at speed. So with decentralized systems, what we're seeing is that they can be grown in stages where people get benefits along the way. They're much better at mapping the urban growth. So rather than us trying to anticipate how urban populations will grow, we can actually add modules as the population grows. So we can map it much more accurately. We can also stage our investments. But I think one of the most important aspects of decentralization with respect to sanitation is that we have the freedom to be technologically agnostic. So we can deliver different tailored solutions for different types of communities. So a sanitation solution to sort of an informal settlement could be very different to a sanitation solution to, say, an affluent community. And the third thing is that decentralization also supports the circular economy objectives, because resources are being generated close to where they're needed and close to where they can be used. You know, water is heavy, and moving it long distances requires a lot of effort, a lot of energy. The final thing about decentralization is that, you know, it provides greater climate resiliency because it distributes risks. So if you have an extreme event, if you have flooding or something, you can contain the failure of that within a module without it sort of propagating throughout the entire system. So it gives you this sort of built-in resiliency. I think a tactical opportunity that we have to learn as a sector from the decentralized energy and telephony sectors is that while governments set standards and they provided support and they enforced the rules, they didn't themselves directly compete with the approaches that were emerging. Rather, they created a space, a marketplace for new ideas to flourish. Now, if you look at mobile phones, right, what's interesting is that in a lot of informal settlements, it's not that people have mobile phones, right? It's that they have the ability to charge them. So you can go to areas where people don't have access to sanitation, they have very poor water supply, but they have the infrastructure in place to charge their phones. And so we in the sanitation sector need to learn from this. There's little sense in governments mandating and then purchasing a single one-size-fits-all standard solution for every home. Governments just can't know what the best technology is or what's the most fitting technology for every district or community. But what governments can do is they can mandate and support financially the equitable enforcement and universal protection of human rights with high standards of compliance. And governments should be accountable for that. But what they should do is allow entrepreneurs and other type of actors to come in and deliver tailored solutions to different types of communities. Because in my opinion, we have done very badly in delivering to the unserved. And it's only by opening this up and allowing different actors to come in and, recognizing that there are different strokes for different folks or different horses for different courses, whatever metaphor you want to use, and sort of really, trying to deliver what we haven't delivered for a very, very long time.
Thank you so much, Carla, especially for showing us the bunch of examples of decentralized systems and the decentralized approach. It's very vivid. Thank you so much. We have approximately 15 minutes left with the panelists here before Jörg will close the event. And I would like to ask the panelists, of course, you can also tap into questions from the chat, but we won't have the time to look and answer every question. I would like to pinpoint you down to prioritize actions, maybe 3 actions, two to 3 actions you would like to see implemented that would really make a change. A little exercise, a prioritizing exercise. Maybe Anna-Katharina, you would like to start. What 3 prioritized actions should we take on whatever level you choose that would make a change in water governance and water management?
Okay, Maike, I want to try and combine it with answering 2 questions in the chat, if I may. So Gunnar Braun asked after what, how to work against the paramount of the economic, I would rephrase it like this, and how to, if the use for water, mining, etc., agriculture is simply so attractive, how to then work against it. And I think, of course, it's a question you can't have sort of one solution that fits in all contexts. In some, it's working to actually show the value, not just the economic value, but overall value of water in other sectors, or to really employ also or push for a longer term perspective in policy making through referencing different strategies, also then, for instance, moving beyond the national level of strategies, the regional or international level, Agenda 2030, etc., or address the consumers directly. But I also want to say there are contexts where we have seen that something seemingly unrelated helps to create or put a spotlight onto local level, local water governance and shift priorities. And I want to give the example of gender and women rights in Uzbekistan, where we have or had and still have a strong focus on cotton and wheat agriculture, and with this sort of, as soon as you want to reach big areas, you end up focusing on cotton and wheat agriculture, which is male dominated. But the increasing awareness and interest also to move slowly women's rights into the perspective of internationally financed projects in the western part or northwestern part of Uzbekistan helped to move the light onto small-scale agriculture, because that is female dominated. So women rights, and that topic to focus on women rights helped to focus on local small-scale agriculture, fruit and vegetable agriculture that also used a lot less water. So what I want to say is...
And that would be one priority, right?
Well, it is an important, I mean, it is very important to figure out how local level initiatives that might not be in the top priority list of a government can lobby for different water rights, basically. Yeah, and better water rights. That is really a matter of how the exact socioeconomic context is, what you can employ. Also, I want to just mention our WBGU's recommendation to work towards and to continue working towards an international water strategy. And we are, of course, well aware of the fact how difficult and even more difficult this is, and more unlikely it is that we will see an international water strategy being developed. But there was a question in the chat saying, how does that differ from the UN system-wide strategy document on water and sanitation from last year, which is a document that is aiming for UN system wide coordination between agencies. And what we here propose is to develop a strategy that brings together blue and green water. And Carla, you mentioned virtual water, very, very important. We have a section on virtual water in the report, but probably not enough. And I very much agree with you that the debates within the Agenda 2030 discussions on virtual water are important and will have to be developed further. Also, the whole spillover debate will have to be developed further for a beyond 2030 discussion. So blue and green water, then to emphasize the joint preparedness for water emergencies across the different governance levels and across the different policy fields, internal and external policy fields. And then we emphasize this water mapping initiative that includes the expert panel and a scientific platform bringing expertise from the different regions together, not replicating it, but basically bringing it together in order to allow joint policy advice. And that, yeah, I just want to underline it, but it is definitely in the top priority list that I would like to formulate. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I have the experience that pinpointing researchers down to like just 3 points is, it's an exercise. Thank you, Anna-Katharina, for your very, very valid points. Akica, would you like to continue? What do you think should we prioritize internationally?
There are a number of things that needs to be prioritized, but I mean, I think that what is important is really to work at the different scales and to see how the things are connect to each other. So, for example, I think the international water strategy, I think is a very important one, but also how it I mean, what we have at regional and local. And at local level is something that I would like to see developed, work at the level of the territory where the different sectors come together and look at the water issues together. And from the food perspective, from the point of view of education, tourism, industry, agriculture, and so on. And this is not really taking place because of the fragmentation of the sectors. So really, trying to find a way to make the IWM or the water, food, energy nexus and so on be implemented, but at the territory level. This is one thing I think it's really would be important, and it would reduce this fragmentation and will make people more aware and work on this policy coherence and more aware of the water and its importance for the different sectors. The second thing, because of the importance of the water for the agriculture sector, I think that really working on enhancing water use efficiency. And one thing that I would like for the points that I'm going to mention each time, there is a question of data and governance, because data is one thing that is really missing all over on the continent, Africa even more. But now when we are moving in the area of AI and using different kind of AI instrument and tools, we need data. And for water use efficiency, for example, in agriculture, we need would it be green water or blue water or gray water? We need to have this data collection and to have this work on, to make, in order to be able to develop, tools that are, and if not, this question of divide between countries is going to increase. So we have really to move on very quickly. The third point is really on water supply and sanitation, because for me, we cannot talk about water supply without talking about sanitation, and really putting more emphasis on this citywide, this hybrid water supply and sanitation system that is really going to provide, a much better service to, especially for the poor women, of course, that are, and this we need also that we are going to tap in the, funding. It is from the point of view of infrastructure, innovative financing that is needed, community participation, and also, and with the involvement of development bank and donors, the private sector. So I think that these are the 3 points that I would like to mention, but again, with these different scales and different approaches, and focus on data and governance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Akica. Martina, your 3 priorities, what do you think?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll touch upon things that were said also by Anna-Katharina and Akica, but so I think everything we've talked about, and particularly, main concern being water insecurity and how to deal with that in terms of adaptation, cannot happen without proper funding. For instance, the UN adaptation gap report signaled that we're still lacking between $187 and $359 billion annually to actually be able to adapt effectively by 2030 to the challenges that we are faced with climate-induced water insecurity. So adaptation financing for water is my first priority, and we know that rich global north nations are historically responsible for the situation we find ourselves in with climate change, and so they should pay, we, as I'm a citizen of one of them, should pay a fair share, not even a fair share, the right share of that in order for adaptation to be able to happen, particularly in countries that are more vulnerable and also not historically responsible for where we are at. The second priority, I link back to what Akica was saying, data. There are regions of the world where, like I said before, data is missing, where meteorological stations are not in place, we're really missing the basic infrastructure. So that is definitely my priority. And number 2, we cannot talk about climate resilient water management if we do not have the data to know how the situation actually is on the ground. And or if we're talking about future risk, but we're building these models that are based on data that is not even regional, but they are global or multinational in a way that are not able to predict actually what is happening at a nation level in some countries where we know we have no data for. And then my very last priority relates to improving integration of local and indigenous knowledge. This is something that we try to do. Again, during the IPCC report, that is also done in IPBES reports, but there needs to be done more systematically, because what I think there is a pretty substantial also misunderstanding in the scientific world, where often many of us think that particularly indigenous knowledge and local knowledge is something that is anchored in the past. And this is actually a major misunderstanding, because indigenous knowledge is adaptable, has been adapting, and allows communities all over the world nowadays to actually adapt to ongoing water insecurity challenges. So being able to integrate that knowledge when we work on scientific assessments, but also in the science policy interface, is actually crucial, because like I said before, the majority of action when it pertains to climate-induced water insecurity and adaptation are taken at the local level. So if we do not integrate that level of knowledge, we are potentially missing like a huge avenue for solutions, you know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martina. We have a couple of minutes left, and I don't want Carla to rush. So maybe some of you can stay in a couple of minutes longer. I'm asking you that. That would be great. So Carla, your three priorities. Don't feel in a rush, but we have to come to an end at some point.
Sure. No, I can be fairly quick. I think I agree with all the three previous speakers around the points that they brought up, so I won't repeat those. But I think one thing for me, and we're still struggling, you know, as an association, is really to change the default way in which we manage water, right? Particularly at the urban scale. And I think that what we need to try and do is to better have frameworks that reward best practice, you know, practices like water use efficiency, resource use efficiency, extraction of value from waste streams. I mean, we talk a lot about this, but still we're not putting in mechanisms to sort of really try and incentivize people to do this. I think we also need to promote systems that are more integrated, you know, so the hybrid grey and green and multi-use and multifunctional type systems. And again, that came out quite clearly in the report that was being presented. And the other point in relation to the first one is really encouraging more flexible systems which you know, have increased levels of unity to the hydrological cycle. And that would be my second point. It's really to better try and understand uncertainties, and, you know, to look at how we can develop solutions that have this inbuilt adaptive capacity. You know, working within IWA, we're still finding that people tend to want to have a dot on the wall 30 years from now, and just they're focused on moving in that direction. And this sort of idea of building in stages and having this capacity to move in different directions, I think it requires a lot more creative thinking, a lot more right brain thinking, which often is missing in you know, among engineers. And the third point I think that is really important is this systems perspective. I think everybody sort of refers to it in what they're saying, but you know, we do have a problem because we are still very silo based. You know, we pay lip service to sort of integration and things like that, but we haven't really constructed governance models that really, you know, encourage the systems approach. We still don't educate at universities a very sort of systems view of the water cycle, and this understanding that, you know, there are all these unintended consequences with our interventions, but also potentially a lot of benefits from certain types of interventions. So these would be my three sort of actions that I would encourage.
Thank you so much, Carla. I would like, I think my summary, super short. I think you all agree on inclusive, decentralized, systemic approaches when it comes to either water management and water governance. That has to also be an international roof where everything comes together. I put it that short, but I would also like to, or I would like to ask the other WBGU council members if they have, because they're here in the audience as well, if you have any further comments, questions, ideas that you would like to provide at the end of the discussion here before Jörg comes in with closing questions. I'm just waiting a second. I know we are, maybe they're just very polite because we are at the end of the event. I just wanted to give the opportunity. So Jörg, maybe you can sum up and close. Thank you very much for the discussion from my side, but I give over to you, Jörg.
Thank you, Maike. What an inspiring discussion. So I think there was something in for everyone. That's what I felt. Really great assessments, great statements. I remember Akica said water is everybody's business, or Martina said it, and then Akica added because everyone is affected. And I think that's probably a good basis. And also Carla mentioned water is systemic, as you just repeated, Maike, and interconnected. And I think if that's the basis, we can push forward to build support, to take everyone along and also relate this to decision makers, I think then I'm relatively optimistic. If you would like to learn more, there are more opportunities to come to exchange your thoughts about this report with us. There's an upcoming keynote presentation from our council member Hans Pörtner on the 18th of March at the International Conference on Value of Water in Frankfurt. And I have a keynote on the same day on the report if you happen to be in Southern Africa in Cape Town as part of the IWA Water Reuse Conference. And with that, I'd like to thank our audience for your interest in this report and your great questions, and in particular also pointing to resources and solutions. And special thanks, of course, goes to our panelists, Martina, Akica, Carla, and Anna-Katharina, for your insights. Thank you so much. I think this was an enriching experience. And last but not least, big thank you to you, Maike, being our moderator, for doing an excellent job. And with that, I wish you all the best. Thanks again for your interest, and looking forward to further discussions. Thank you.